and welcome to An Idol Called Food. I'm your host, JT Tapias, and in today's episode, we're going to be speaking about how to transform your health through biblical principles. We have an amazing guest that we're going to be going back and forth on this interview, and I think you guys are going to get lots and lots of value from it. And so stay tuned. But before I get started, I want to tell you a little bit about EYBPlantFuel.com supplements that make a tremendous difference in the way you show up on your day to day. And if you're looking to show up like the best version of yourself, then go to EYBPlantFuel.com, pick up your supplements, and start your journey today. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Caleb, welcome to the show. How are you, brother?
I'm doing well, brother. How are you doing today?
Excellent. I'm excited for this conversation. I know we had been in the past talked about something like this, and we finally brought it to fruition. So this is exciting. Just to give you guys a little bit of background on Caleb. Caleb came through the EYB plan quite a while ago. I think almost a year now, right?
Yep. It was actually, this time last year.
Right. And he absolutely crushed it. I'm not sure. Did you lose 30 or 35 pounds?
I think it was actually 37.
37 pounds in 90 days, which is pretty amazing. And ever since he graduated the program, we have gone back and forth. We've stayed in touch, and he mentioned that. He said, JT, I'm doing these things. I'm still maintaining. He says, I get to speak because of what he does. He gets to speak to all these experts. And so I said, man, I would love to have you on an interview. He reached out. He said, hey, I've been working with people, sharing some things, some biblical principles on how to stay healthy. And so that's what we're here to speak about, guys. And so let's jump right into it, Caleb. You had this amazing journey on the Empty Your Bucket nutrition plan. There are so many plans out there, right? There's so many voices in this space. And I guess my question to you is, why was this different for you?
Yeah, great question. So as you said, JT, there are so many different programs out there, right? The ketos and you count your macros and all that, and you get to a point where it's just like, who do I even listen to? I don't know what's true anymore, and there's so much information.
Yeah.
And growing up, man, I never really had an in-depth understanding for nutrition. And it got to a point for me where I sat down with you for 15 minutes and you taught me more about nutrition in 15 minutes than I had ever learned in my entire life.
Oh, man. Praise God. That's humbling. And, I appreciate that. And, for you guys out there listening to this, it's not that we've come up with anything special. I mean, I'll echo Solomon's words when he says there's nothing new under the sun. And I truly believe that. It's just the way we've organized things and how we've recycled principles that we know work, and then we've chucked out the ones we know that don't work. And so this is what Caleb is basically mentioning is when he came to the program, there's a lot of clarity around certain concepts that maybe with other programs are a little more difficult to understand, more complex. So Caleb, you came on and you went right into it. You started utilizing all of the principles. You started to see your goals come to fruition. Inside of the plan, we have phase 1, 2, and 3. I already know your answer, but I'll ask anyway. What would you say was the most difficult? What was the most challenging part of the program?
Phase 1 for sure. Phase 1 was definitely the most challenging one, man. And it forces you to unlearn a bunch of stuff that you've been doing for years, And so when you get into it, it reminds me of there's this passage of scripture, JT, where there's a scholar named Nicodemus, and he goes to Jesus, right? And he's asking him all these questions, and Jesus says, you have to be born again. And that's kind of what phase 1 is like.
Yeah. So that famous story with Jesus and Nicodemus, and him being a teacher of the law, the teacher of Israel. And yet, here he comes to the rabbi, to Jesus, and Jesus says, you must be born again. You must be born of spirit, water, and spirit. And it's interesting because I love what his response is like. Well, what does that mean? Do I have to kind of reintroduce myself into my mother's womb, right?
Yep.
And there's a sarcasm to that because he's a very wise man. He's not being naive, but I think when most people come into phase one, there's sort of some preconceived notions about other plans, and it's funny because phase one should last between 6 to 8 weeks, but you hear people really in that struggle, and it's not the struggle, and you can attest for this. It's not that you were hungry, because you weren't hungry, right?
Right.
For the most part, I mean, 8 to 12 days, yes, but then after that, you were pretty satiated. But there was that struggle of maybe thinking, man, I can't live like this forever. This is something I get often when people are like, well, this is just not sustainable. I'm like, well, you're not meant to stay in phase one. You got to move on to phase two and phase three. And then the world kind of opens up to you. And so I think in that phase one, and correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest struggle is getting out of your own way. The biggest struggle is resetting your palate, meaning changing your affections for foods that may be getting you in trouble, and replacing them with nutrient density that it's going to keep you satiated, and you're not going to have all these cravings and the need to snack. But then that big mountain to climb, which is resetting your brain's reward pathways, which simply says that food is a very emotional thing. There are a lot of emotional anchors around food. And so, an emotional anchor is anything that gets connected to your nervous system and to your emotions and to your memory when you're at a high emotion. So, of course, this happens with food. We take a bite of our favorite food and we have this, experience where dopamine is secreting and we feel good and it feels comfortable. It changes our state and those emotions get anchored. And so when you actually remove those sort of dependencies, to not call it addictions, it's a struggle, man. It's a struggle.
It is. It is. And I could definitely attest to that. I've seen other people who, like when they're sad and they start eating ice cream or start indulging all these sweets, or their favorite comfort food, what we'll call comfort food, right, might be pizza or like brownies or things of that nature. And to your
Right.
point, it's all emotional. I think that's the hardest part about phase one.
100%. 100%. So, but we don't stay there, right? We move on to phase two, which is another struggle, because now all of a sudden 6-8 weeks in, you have insulin stability. You've kicked the cravings. You have you can self regulate. You have a lot of self control, and then all of a sudden you start sprinkling in these slow digesting carbs, which then cause cravings all over again, right? Because you get that burst of insulin, and then again for the first 8 to 12 days, you're experiencing kind of like, man, for 6 to 8 weeks I haven't had any cravings, I haven't been hungry, and now I'm hungry again, and it's me trying to push people through that second phase and say, hey, this is part of the process. Like, you gotta don't revert back to just fibrous carbs, proteins, and fats. Like, you can incorporate some of these slow digesting carbs, but it's going to take a little while for you to really overcome those cravings and those temptations, and then you can have a little bit of variety, a little bit of balance in your diets, because we don't demonize macronutrients. Then in phase three, it's just kind of maintenance, right? We bring in a little bit of everything. You get to practice that famous 80-20. This is the phase where it would be most popular known as intuitive eating. And intuitive eating simply says that at this point, intuitive eating done well says that at this point, you have control over your cravings. You can self-regulate. In other words, you are a rational human being that's making proactive choices versus the reactive choices that we usually make when we get tempted by food. So now we can say, you know what? Today, I want to have just a regular sandwich with white bread, and I'm going to eat that for lunch. And then my next meal is going to be a protein shake, and I'm going to be back on the plan. And then and then 2-3 days later, you say you're at breakfast and you say, I'm going to add some toast or some oatmeal, or whatever it is you want, you have that freedom to pick and choose. But it's really interesting because in phase 3, what I often see, and I don't know if you would vouch for this, you get so used to feeling good on the parameters, on the guidelines, that when you actually go off, you can't wait to get back on.
Yeah. Yep.
Would you
Yep.
agree with that?
100%.
Isn't that crazy? I I try to explain to people in phase 1 and 2 about this, like, hey, you're going to get to the point where you're going to go on vacation and you're going to wish you were home and you were back at your routine. And they're like,
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever be there. And it's like, yeah, you just wait. You just
It's
wait.
a real thing. It's a real thing. I think because when you get a couple weeks into phase 1,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
you develop this habit, right?
mm-hmm.
And the transition from phase 1 to phase 2, for me, it was tough. I know at the beginning, right? Everybody's like, "Oh man, I can't wait to get to phase 2, get some carbs back," right?
Yeah,
For me, that was the hardest transition. I was just like, I don't know. I think phase 1 is kind of growing on me. I think
yeah,
I kind of like it.
yeah, man. I'll tell you what, it's interesting. It's just those boundaries, those safe boundaries that provide so much comfort. But we fight and kick, right? All the way through. We're just fighting and kicking, and we don't want boundaries because it's just our sinful nature, right? It's so interesting. But then when we understand that it's the best thing for us, we start to see value there. Then we just embrace it, right? Or at least that's the hope, that you'll get to that point where you realize, hey, this is healthy, and I'm going to just continue to embrace these boundaries. I often tell the anecdote of a playground that was right next to a busy highway, and the kids would come out for recess, and there was no gate separating the actual playground from the busy turnpike. So the teachers would actually put kids on one side and say, you can only play on this one side where you're going to be safe, because we don't want you running into the road. Well, one day, a genius decided to put up a fence. And once the fence went up, right, now they had the entire playground to enjoy. And I
Mm,
love that analogy, because the analogy simply says that, when you don't have boundaries, when you don't have safeguards in your life, it's dangerous, right? You are game, and you're easy to hunt, be hunted down.
yeah.
But when you actually have that fence, those boundaries, those guardrails, man, now you have all this freedom to play, right? And so where I think most programs go wrong is that they put up these big guardrails from the get-go, and it's always constrained. It's always a small little box where you can operate out of. And I think that's where most people get desperate and jump ship, right?
Right.
So that's on the mechanic side of things. I guess spiritually, you're a man of faith, you're a Christian. What were some parallels? What were some things that, as you were going through this sort of visceral program, right? I'm looking to lose weight. I'm looking to feel better, to perform better. All the sort of performance-based aesthetic goals. What were some of the intrinsic things that you experienced as you were going through this process?
Yeah. So I would say like the biggest foundation for me was just understanding that my body's the temple of Christ.
Mm,
And with that understanding, you begin to look at how you exercise differently. And then more importantly, you're looking at what you're putting into your body just a
mm,
little bit more differently, the
mm,
different types of foods. And so even within the 15 minutes that I sat down with you, I had never heard insulin explained the way that you explained it.
mm.
And I was just like, what? I'm putting all of that into my body.
Yeah.
And there was this level of conviction. I'll put
Mm,
it that way.
yeah.
And so like one of the things that I like sharing with people, JT, is that one, food is a fuel source, right? And so if I'm eating stuff like all this junk stuff and pizza and all that, right?
Mm-hmm,
Uh,
mm-hmm.
just imagine what that's going to turn into, right? But then two, there's this saying, you are what you eat. And so with that in mind, I'm more cautious now about what I'm eating, and it makes it a little bit more easier to make it through the phases that we were just talking about. You know?
Yeah. I always question that idiom of, you know, you are what you eat. I'm like, man, I would have turned into a chicken already because I eat a lot of chicken. I hope I get the flying part, even though chickens don't fly much, but you know what I mean. Um, but um, but no, I hear you, man, and it's so interesting because I tell people all the time, especially Christians, I say, hey, do you believe that the spirit that raised Jesus from the dead lives in you? And they're like, yes. Like, man, what can't you accomplish?
Yeah,
On top of that, if it's true that he dwells in you and that your body is a temple and that you were bought at a price, then my question to you is, why aren't you treating your temple the way it deserves to be treated?
that's right.
Because people that love church and go to church, man, have the almost respect for their church, right?
Right.
I don't think you would ever bring your trash from home and just dump it in the church, in the sanctuary,
Yeah.
right? You would never do that. People are like, well, why would I do that? No, oh my God, I'll get kicked out. That's disrespectful. I'm like, why do you put all that trash in your temple, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, I think it's little analogies like this, as silly as they sound, that if it touches on your heartstrings, really get people to start thinking differently, and really allowing the words that are on the Bible to sort of peel off of the page and come onto your heart and impact your mind, your emotions, and your actions. And I think as a byproduct of that,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that you taught me coming into the program was just the insane amount of discipline that is needed to get the results that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sharing like one of my big secrets for the amount of weight that I lost was the slow burn cardio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing that every day, rain or no rain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It takes discipline to do that, to get up in the morning, right? And go outside, walk for 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Like it takes discipline to do that.
Mm.
And I remember on the onboarding call, it was just like, all right, make sure you have your shoes by the door, right? Make sure you have your jug of water. You got to be drinking your water. I'm just like, man, I don't know if maybe a mistake. I don't know if I could do this,
Yeah.
but the discipline needed to do that is at an utmost high. And Paul says this in Romans 12, right?
Mm.
Don't conform to the patterns of this world, right?
Yeah.
What that tells me, JT, is that we as Christians are held to a higher standard, right?
100%.
And so now we have to live up to that. So yes, the program by any means is not easy, but that's because you're held to a higher standard to keep your temple clean.
100%. So, man, I mean, if people ask me, man, if you had to do away with 65 books of the Bible and you could only keep one, which one would you keep? I would keep Romans, because it's such a theological treatise on the Christian life, right? And I love Romans chapter 12 verse 1, where it says that we are to live as a holy living sacrifice to the Lord,
Mhm.
right? And prior to Romans chapter 12 verse 1 and verse 11, the last verse there tells us why, right? And it's in the face of the sacrifice that was made on the cross, and therefore we are to live as a living sacrifice. And then Paul gets really prescriptive down below that verse, where he says, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you can discern the will of God. And what I love, this is Paul, right? And this is a very spiritual man. He's not just telling us go be super spiritual. He's telling us that we need to be countercultural, and he says the way to do that is to actually transform our mind.
Yep.
So he's giving importance to our cognitive processes, and that's what I love about food. And is that if you're eating the right things, and it piggybacks off what you said, where you said we are what we eat. Well, we are what we eat because as we consume certain nutrients, they produce different thoughts in us, and different thoughts produce different emotions, and different emotions produce different actions. And if those actions are positive, they impact our habits. And if those habits are positive, and we're channeling them through the Word of God, then we have a Christ-centered character, which is what ultimately we're all seeking, right, as believers. But to your point with discipline, I think when people hear that word, I think most people cringe. I think most people are like, man, like some have it and some don't, and I heavily disagree with that idea. What we basically do inside of the program is break down discipline, and that's exactly what I was doing for you. You were saying, because when you hear the word discipline, it's a big word, it's an ambiguous word, it's almost abstract.
Right.
But when you actually go in and you break down what discipline is, then it becomes a lot easier. And my definition of discipline is being able to execute on a particular habit consistently, regardless of what's happening outside.
Mm.
That's it, right? So like when you hear that, you can say, "Well, I can do that." Right? You just gave me steps on how to become disciplined. But if I just tell you go be disciplined,
Yeah.
that's like me telling my girls, uh, "Guys, behave." But what does that mean? Does that mean don't talk? Does that mean don't stand up? Does that mean, what does that mean?
Right.
So behave is a big thing. Discipline is a big thing. But when you can actually go in and you can parse a word, man, it's super powerful.
Absolutely.
Right. Right. So, man, good stuff, brother. I know some people have been coming your way as a byproduct of your transformation, and you've been guiding them. And I love what you said over the phone the other day. You said, I tell these people I'm no expert, but I've worked with those experts. And
Yeah.
man,
Yep.
that is that's what I call experiential knowledge, which sometimes weighs more than the theoretical stuff, right? And because you actually went through it, you're a product of it, so you can speak loudly to that. Can you just share with us a quick 30 seconds on, what are those three principles that you share with people that come your way?
Yeah. So the first principle that I share with them is when you change what you think about food, then you'll begin to eat better. That's the
Mm,
first thing. The second thing that I tell people is that, we talk about the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your health is going to be nutrition.
mm,
That 20% is going to be exercise, whether that's walking, going to the gym, whatever that looks like.
mm,
The third thing that I share with people is if you don't have a why that is strong enough,
mm,
it's
mm,
going to be very hard for you to maintain whatever change you make to your health.
mm.
And so those three principles, without like even getting into the nitty gritty,
The
you know,
dynamics, yeah.
right, without getting into all of that, those three principles have helped me with my journey and have helped me maintain. Right. So what I like about you, JT, is, and this is something that you always say, that when you take people through your program, it's a terrible business plan for you because they'll never need you. Right. And
Yeah.
like for anybody who watches this, like I haven't gone back to you, right, to be like, hey, JT, I need to come back into the program. Like you've taught me everything that I need to know about
Yeah.
my nutrition and my journey. Right. From
Mm,
time to time,
mhm.
I'll ask you some questions about
Right.
certain things, but
Right.
for the most part, this is a lifestyle thing that you've taught me.
That's amazing, man. That's amazing. So, that's so cool. And the cool thing is you actually have, once you come through the program, you have access. I mean, we're friends now, and of course, we chat back and forth. But even with those people that finish the program, they still have the ability to come on and ask questions and be part of the webinars and do all those things. And that's our way of simply saying, hey, this is a one-stop shop. Like you don't have to come back and keep giving us money. We're going to give you all the information, and then we're going to create a community that you can always come back to. You can always ask questions, and I think that's very encouraging to most people. So to close out here, just alone, give me those three concepts. So I know the last one was the why, but let's do them in order. So number one, what you think about when you change what you think about food. Walk me through those three.
Yeah.
Just the three.
Yeah. So when you change what you think about food, you begin to eat food differently.
Hmm.
Then the second one, applying the 80-20 rule, 80% of your health is in regards to your nutrition, and that 20% is in regards to your exercise or your fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And then that third one is you need to have a why that's strong enough in order to have everlasting change.
I like that. So that's from a nutrition standpoint, but because I always love to pair things, parallel to the Bible.
Yeah.
Those three points that you made there. When you change what you think about food, you change what you eat, right? You kind of change your perspective around food. I say that when you actually get, for the very first time, the veil comes off and you get to see sin for what it is, your life radically transforms.
Yep.
Because if the veil comes off, your heart has been healed, and now you're a recipient of grace. And being a recipient of grace, God puts faith in your heart so that you can believe in his son, and then you have power, right? And then number two, which is the 80-20, is kind of my own thing and my own experience, which is I love the Bible. I'm a student of the Bible, but I believe that 20% of your walk is information. And 80% should be action.
Yeah. That's good.
Which is the theme of James, right?
Right.
James says that faith without works is dead.
Yep.
Right. And then number three, your why. When you know who you are a son and a daughter of, it's a game changer.
Right.
When you truly know that in your heart and in your mind, in that sequence, in your heart and in your mind, it's a game changer, because you're no longer trying to please man, you're trying to please God. And that is radically different, right? It's a very different upside down system that the world has. Right. But this has been awesome, brother. I always enjoy chatting with you. By the way, guys, for those of you watching, you're seeing this man sitting right now, but he's actually a 21st century giant. He's what are you, 6'4"?
6'3".
6'3". Man, we are from different planets. I'm 5'8", so I like to stay in touch with my brother here, so he could tell me, how the atmosphere is and whatnot. Good stuff, bro. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. This has been an encouraging, edifying time. I hope, guys, that you've gotten something out of this, that some way, somehow, we've planted a seed of hope and understanding that this very complex, very confusing world of nutrition doesn't have to be that way, that there are some certain tools and concepts out there that you can apply right away to radically transform your mind, your body, and your spirit. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Ciao, ciao.